you, Nicola. Hi everybody. For those of you who don't know me or don't know me very well, as I said, I'm Andrew Roff. Been here 3 and a bit years at Christchurch, and for the last 18 months, treasurer here, which is good. It's a lot of hard work, actually. It's quite a lot of hours, but it's interesting and it's fascinating. And I know that might sound weird to some of you, but it is. I'm definitely a numbers kind of person. I work as a finance director in a health tech startup in Hammersmith, and been in finance startup world for nearly 10 years now. And I'm married to Ruth and have 2 daughters. And, I love to run. So if any of you are interested in running, I'll always be up for a chat about that. Anyway, that's me. What I'm really keen to talk about today is a message about giving. It's not how do you give, it's not put your forms at the back, although that will come at the end. It's what I've heard about giving in the past and really, really resonated with me. And I want to partake that message to you this morning. It's something that, I guess a credit goes to a guy called Adam Dyer, who runs a church in Yeovil. I heard this talk from him about 10 years ago. I've adapted it and made it my own, but it blew my mind about actually thinking about giving in a different way. So without further ado, let's get on with it. It's called From Consumers to Givers. And let's start about 8 years ago. So 8 years ago, I was working for another health tech in South Kensington. When one thinks of South Kensington, you think probably museums, probably tourists. It's also very, very affluent. And I know Chiswick is quite an affluent area, but I think South Ken is another level up. I would bump into random celebrities on my commute to work. Hugh Grant, probably the biggest name I've just walked past on my way to work, which was quite random. For the football fans here, Roberto Mancini. He was waiting for his wife outside a hairdresser to pick him in South Ken. Very odd, but one of my mates got his signature and was very happy. It's got the hairdressers, it's got the gyms, it's got the restaurants to match the wealth. Anyway, I'm on my way to work. I'm cycling to work. I live in Acton, cycling to South Ken, and I pass a red Ferrari. Everybody knows what a red Ferrari looks like. Here it is, a beautiful car. I think should always be in red. Parked on the side of the street. The person that owns this red Ferrari is probably thinking, I think I've made it. I've got a nice car, worth about the same price as a UK flat. A couple of £100,000 for a car. I'd be like, I've got it. So I'm cycling past this car, and literally 50 yards further up the road, there's a Bugatti Veyron. Now, for those of you who know your cars or ever watched Top Gear a few years ago, you might know a little bit about this car. 450 made ever. It's worth about £1 million when it was new 10 years ago. And it goes at 250 miles an hour. So it's not really a supercar, it's a hypercar. And, to see both these cars within about 50 yards of my commute was kind of, wow, I almost fell off my bike. And why am I telling you this story? Well, the situation is the fact that the Ferrari driver here, he has a problem, or she has a problem. They could, if they open their eyes and looked up the road, they go, well, there's a car worth about 5 times more than my supercar. They might suddenly feel perhaps they haven't made it in life quite as much as they thought they had. Perhaps they're going to feel second best. But the good news here is the Ferrari driver has another option, another way to look at the situation. They could look at me. Pretty hard to miss in my bright yellow coat from the boutique store called Go Outdoors. And my steed is not too shabby either. My cobalt blue hybrid, which cost about 300 or 400 quid from Evans Cycles. So does the driver choose to look up the road at the Bugatti or look down the road at me on my bike? If they look to the supercar or the hypercar, the £1 million hypercar up the road, they risk feeling poor, that they haven't quite made it yet. That their Ferrari, whilst lovely, isn't as good as the more expensive, faster car parked up the road. Or the Ferrari driver could look at me, see someone on a half-decent bike going a half-decent speed, and see someone in considerably less well-off position than them, I am not suggesting that they see poverty, but they ain't seeing a supercar either. And here is the issue. The world teaches us to look up. The world teaches us to look up, to look at the Bugatti, rather than looking down at the bike in this situation. So here we are, back in Chiswick, and I know there will be some people in this room that have enough. There will be some people in this room that have more than enough. And there will be some that struggle to make ends meet financially every month. But whatever your reality, can I encourage you to keep tuned in? Because I don't want you to miss out on what for me was a really revolutionary way to think about giving. A study was done in the US about people who were wealthy. The first group of people asked were people who earned about $250,000 a year. That's about £200,000. They were asked if they were considered themselves to be high-income earners. 30% of them did not consider themselves to be high-income earners. Another study was done asking a group of US millionaires if they thought they were rich. 40% did not think they were rich. 40%. The third study was done asking multimillionaires with wealth range from between $25 million to $2 billion if they felt financially secure. Over 50% said they did not feel financially secure. More than half. Of this high wealth group, this third study, a follow-up question was asked as to what would it take for them to feel financially secure. And the amazing bit here is across the board, they all suggested they would need around 25% more. So if they had a $25 million wealth, they thought they needed about $6 million more to be financially secure. But if they had $1 billion of wealth, they thought they needed another 250 million more. It's mind-blowing, isn't it? Or is it? These stats lead us to three conclusions. Firstly, the more we have, the poorer it can make us feel. Those studies were done. The first one was 30% with people on very, very nice salary. It went to 40% with people with $1 million of wealth at least, and then 50% with these 25 million plus net wealth individuals or families. Secondly, it leads us to the conclusion that everyone needs, or thinks they need, around 25% more to be satisfied. Whether they've got 200 in the bank, 2,000 in the bank, or even 2 million in the bank. But thirdly, and most importantly, these stats tell us that enough is not an amount. Enough is an attitude, it's a perspective, and it's a choice. In the words of DJ Fatboy Slim, for those of you who listened to dance music in the 90s like me, enough is right here, right now. Right here, right now. If we choose it, but never here and never now if we listen to the messages around us. Because unfortunately, we celebrate and we live in a culture of not enough. It's how our whole marketing culture works. Yet we, as Christians, claim to be a people of counterculture as we follow Jesus. So what does that mean as we stare these stats in the face? As we look at the culture of consumerism? And how does giving fit into all of this? Well, I believe that giving can be the antidote to not enough. Even though that sounds wrong, but we're going to explore it now. Right from the first instructions on how to live that God gives us as his people, God wants us to get into the habit of giving. The Bible talks about giving the first fruits of the harvest. First fruits are mentioned 32 times in the Bible, and a significant proportion of those references are talking about giving. particularly in the first 5 books in the Bible. And then in Proverbs 3, verse 9, it says this: "Honor the Lord with our wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine." So the instinctive reaction to receiving this harvest should be to give from it. God doesn't just bless us to prove how much he loves us. He blesses us so we can be a blessing, to make generosity an instinct, a habit, whether that's with money or time or talent. The Bible also says to consider the poor. Psalm 41, verse 1 says this: "Blessed is the one who considers the poor. In the day of trouble, the Lord delivers him." We should be looking to the people who have less than us and sharing what we have with them, because this changes us and it saves us. It teaches us to look in the opposite direction to the way the world tells us to look. Rather than looking at those who have more and exercising our competitive muscles, instead we look at those who have less and exercise our compassionate muscles. We are told to give a percentage of everything we have on a regular basis. This frees us from the need to have more. This teaches us to be generous rather than mean, and it teaches us the habit of giving rather than consuming. Because giving is the antidote to consuming. It liberates us. It shifts the center of our world from ourselves to God and the wonder of life around us. It breaks our addiction to consuming and to self. And it teaches us to live lives of joy, hope, and abundance. Real lives, eternal lives, deeply whole lives. We are created to be givers by God. But the world teaches us to look at other things, whether it's the cars, whether it's a house, whether it's toys and gadgets, a more powerful job. And then we end up needing a bigger experience, a bigger toy, a faster car, a promotion at work. And that cycle never stops unless we are countercultural and choose to pull ourselves out of the cycle. It's far too easy to become an insatiable consumer, the complete opposite of what we're created to be, which is to be givers. And so coming into land on this giving talk, I want to talk briefly about the parable of the feeding the 5,000. The one where Jesus feeds 5,000 people, and that's probably just the men, with one boy's packed lunch. Now, a quick aside here, and I don't know about this, but I wonder whether there might have been more than one person with food in that 5,000. But that's not really the point. And the big but here is only one person offered up any food to the disciples when they were asking for food. And this person gave his lunch, 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And really interestingly, he didn't give some of his lunch. He didn't give 1 loaf and 1 fish and kept the rest so he could have something himself. He gave all of his lunch. And in doing so, he puts himself in need of a miracle for his own lunch. He could have done it with 1 loaf and 1 fish, and he would have had a great story to tell. But he would have actually missed out on being fully part of the miracle. Put yourself in the way of miracles. So God calls us to receive a blessing and pass it on. We get to partake in the miracle, but only if we choose to. A few years ago, I went to Sweden to help with a ministry trip with running a church weekend along with my vicar at the time and my wife. And basically, my job, along with Ruth, was to pray during the service, particularly during the talk, for God to give me pictures to give to the congregation or to give to individuals after the talk. Properly scary. It's not something that I'm massively in my comfort zone for. Basically, if God didn't turn up, I was sunk. And this was a big sacrifice for me. Not the giving up of the weekend, but this taking myself out of the comfort zone. I knew this before I went on the trip, and yet with a lot of trepidation and some encouragement from Ruth and my vicar at the time, I went, and God turned up. I felt closer to God because he'd used me in some small words to give to the congregations on these two meetings. I chose, quite painfully, to partake in God's plan, and in the process he used me, and I felt amazing because of it. Do you live in the not enough? Not enough stuff done. Not enough sleep had. Not enough money to live properly. Not enough time to do all you want to do. Are you looking up at the Bugattis in life? I certainly do in all of these areas from time to time. This message is for me as much as it is for you. And yet, that is not what God calls us to. He says, we are enough. Our God is the God who calls us to be givers and not consumers. When I first heard a similar talk to this at New Wine, it made me properly stop and think about my attitude to wealth and my attitude to not enough. It was a wake-up call that made me understand that striving for more is not the solution, that giving is the antidote to not enough, and that I needed to change my habit of looking up. Also, that I can have freedom through giving. I can have contentment through change in attitude, and that I have enough right here, right now. And also, I long for, as so many of us do here in West London, to see more of God's work around me, around Chiswick, around this area. And that invitation to be part of God's work is here. We just need to bring our packed lunch. A very brief practical note after this talk is that hopefully everybody on the electoral roll will have received a letter in the last week or so. If you have had time to consider what you'd like to give, we are really, really keen to try and increase our regular giving. If you haven't brought your slip with you today, I think there are slips around. At the back there is a box. Ruth Newton-Jones has a box. I can't see where she's here. But I think we're about to go into coffee break. So if you have considered that, then great. We'd love to hear from you. If you haven't, then another week. I think we're trying to get everything in by next Sunday. So please do consider whether you could start giving regularly, whether you could increase your giving regularly. We'd love to hear from you. Once we've got something on paper, we will contact you and work out the practicalities. So we don't have to worry about the practicalities today, but we'd love to hear whether you can give something towards the ongoing work of Christchurch W4. I'll talk a little bit more about that and what that money will go towards tomorrow in the service in the morning. Thank you.